So I'm Greg Simon, and I'm in crowdfunding, and this is really easy because you're a crowd. You've heard of Kickstarter, you've heard of Indiegogo, but the kind of crowdfunding you do for donations is really 70 years old. It started with the March of Dimes. That's how we funded polio research, and that was nonprofit. Now we're getting into investing as crowdsourcing. So first I want to tell you a little bit about how I got here. So 10 years ago, I started an organization called Faster Cures. And for the non-literal minded among you, that means that we were trying to cure things faster. And one of the things we talked about was passion capital, foundations that were starting to invest in private companies for cystic fibrosis research, for melanoma research, for cancer research. And they were investing for their passion, but also to make a profit so they would have more money to invest later on. So after 6 years of talking about that, I got recruited by the CEO of Pfizer to put in practice what I had been preaching all that time. So I went in and tried to be a change agent. And that was really interesting. And I learned a lot. And the first thing I learned was, even the Son of God thought he needed 12 people to help him change anything. He didn't go it alone. Why did I go it alone? So when the CEO who hired me left, I got laid off, or actually I got paid off. And I did what anybody does after they lose their job. I, followed my dreams. I went on, death-defying adventures. I went places where I didn't speak the language. And most importantly of all, I hired a career coach. And as a result of the career coach, I had a lot of different choices, and I'm looking around and I'm trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I decided what I really wanted to do next was start a donor advice fund, a philanthropy, to invest philanthropic money into private companies to lower the cost of research. And so I did what anybody would do. I went to the US-Swedish Life Science Conference in Stockholm. And while I was in Stockholm, I was supposed to have lunch next to this gorgeous Swedish scientist to talk about diabetes. Or I think it was diabetes, because she said, why don't you sit next to me and we can talk, sugar? And instead, when I got to the table, I had a very different table companion. And this guy from New York that I affectionately call the schlub said, what do you do? And I said, what I just told you. And he said, oh, somebody's already done that. You should give that up. So I took his card and thought, what a dick, and then I left. And I came back to New York, and I was in Grand Central one day. I was supposed to meet a friend of mine who had been my massage therapist when I went to the baseball camp and ripped my hamstring. And she was in New York to be a surrogate mother for the second time. Do not ask, but it's a really good story. And she blew me off for coffee because the birth family wanted to take her to the museum so the fetus could get into preschool. And so I get a phone call from a guy named Jeff, and he says, can you come talk to me? I've been looking for you. I heard you 5 years ago and didn't know where you were. And I said, well, where are you? And he said, Grand Central. And I said, so am I. And so I went upstairs, and he told me about Poliwogg. And this is what he told me. In 1979, there was a news story that said it was the end of equities. It meant the end of Wall Street. We'd been in a bear market. Interest rates were double digits. Mortgage rates were double digits. Nobody was buying anything. It was going to be the end of Wall Street as we know it. And then something really strange happened. Actually, it's very predictable. 3 things happened. The baby boomers started turning 35, and that's when people buy stocks. And the mutual funds started getting money from retirement plans because the law changed, and people could invest retirement money in stocks. And IBM introduced the personal computer. What happened? The next 20 years bull market, the biggest we've ever had. Why? Because of the intersection of demographics, policy, and possibilities, or what I call people, policy, and possibilities. But something else happened at the same time. There's something called an accredited investor, because in 1974, the Securities and Exchange Commission said people who don't have a lot of money shouldn't be allowed to risk their money in private investments. And they decided that they would use wealth as a proxy for wisdom. And as a result of that, the people who had $1 million or were making $200,000 a year could invest in private companies, and the rest couldn't. So what happened? Well, The people who could invest earned $30 trillion of wealth. And the people who couldn't invest wanted the same things, a nice house, a nice car, a nice education for their kids, and they got it by accumulating $11.4 trillion of debt. So how did we get here? How did we decide that wealth is a proxy for wisdom? Well, look, think about the Constitution. In the beginning of America, only white propertied men could vote. So that was considered to be the wise class. They could be senators, they could be electors. And then we had this little thing called the Civil War, and the property requirement went away. The race requirement went away. Still, black men could vote, but not white women. And then women were allowed to vote, and then young people were allowed to vote. So since the revolution, we've gradually democratized democracy. But what about wealth? How did that work? Well, we started off with the land. People who owned the land had the wealth. And then we discovered there was a lot of stuff under the land that was really valuable, like oil. And then the guys who had the railroads figured out they could make a lot of money if they charged high prices for moving the oil. So transportation became the wealthy class. And then people figured out you could use steel and cars and factories to make money, and so the manufacturing barons came into play, like Carnegie and Ford. And then it was all about communication with AT&T, telegraph, telephone. And then money itself became the source of wealth, banking, institutional wealth. And then we get to today where it's about the VCs. A VC is someone who takes money from a lot of people for a very small group of people, usually white men, to invest in the future and decide whether you're ever going to hear of Google or LinkedIn or Facebook or anybody else. And the problem with that is that we basically substituted a bunch of rich white men with capital for a bunch of rich white men with property. So we didn't really democratize wealth because it's still controlled by a small group of people who have your money and they get to make the decisions. So, what's new? Well, what's new is the Jobs Act. Now, while you were sleeping, your government, a majority of Republicans and Democrats, the only time it happened in the first term, voted to pass this legislation that allows anybody to invest in private companies. If you're not accredited, you can invest in a private company to a certain degree based on your salary. I would point out that they don't have that policy in Vegas or Atlantic City. You can spend all your money. The average lottery ticket buyer makes $13,000 a year and spends $650 a year on lottery tickets. If the same person had put $600 into Facebook at $1.10 a share and sold it to you, the suckers who buy it at $38, they would have made 2 years' worth of income. But no, we pay the richest of the rich $38 for stuff they bought at $1.10, and we wonder why they're really rich and you're staring at your IPO stock and it's down 20% the next day. But this new law said anybody can invest and companies can raise more money from more people so the unit size can come way down. So you can buy 10 companies for the price that you used to be able to buy one. And the big kahuna, I know this will come as a shock because it did to me, the First Amendment has never applied to private companies. A private company raising money, if you started your own private company to raise money, you may not advertise it in public. You can advertise sex, drugs, strip shows, Vegas, casinos, anything you want, but you can't tell people in public you're raising money for a private company, you go to jail. The law changes this, so for the first time ever, Poliwogg can put an ad out that says, we're raising money for this company, here's what they do, here's what they are about. You come to the site. If you're an accredited investor, you can invest a lot. If you're not accredited, you can invest a certain percentage of your income. Why the government should protect you from investing what you want to invest is a question for another day. The great thing is the same thing that happened before in '81, people, policies, possibilities, is happening right now. The millennial generation is turning 35, 10,000 people a day. They are not going to have a broker at Merrill Lynch. They're doing everything online. They're investing in private companies. They're starting private companies. And they're going to do it through sites like Poliwogg. And the stuff they can do is absolutely unlimited. I read a dozen stories a day of people raising money for libraries, for newspapers, for African American businesses, for Chinese businesses, for women-led businesses, for kids, for all kinds of things, because you can do whatever you can do through crowdfunding for a very simple reason. If people care, they'll put their money where their passion is, and that's what Poliwogg is all about. Our view is that there's a crowd coming, 80 million millennials that are coming that want to invest in the new economy. And they're going to use the Jobs Act and social media, and they're going to change the face of the world by changing who gets to choose the future. And what that means is, now we get to move from the ownership of the future belonging to a few white men who run a lot of funds with other people's money to the crowd. And it means that millions of people can take a risk to lose all their money because they hope that they can help change the future. And keep in mind, sometimes when you invest and lose your money, you still change the future. If you invested in WorldCom stock 20 years ago, you lost all your money, but your cell phone bill was $500. Today, your cell phone bill is $50. Whether you lost or made money on that investment, by over-investing in the internet and cellular communication, we lowered costs for everybody. It's the way it has always worked. So now you get to, what is the proxy for wisdom? It is no longer wealth. It really is the wisdom of the crowds. It's what you're passionate about. It's what you care about. It's what you really want to do. So we asked 2 questions, and these come from my friend Dan Pink, who wrote To Sell is Human, and he wrote Drive and A Whole New Mind. 2 questions you should ask when you're selling anybody anything. Number 1, will this company make a difference in your life? And the second question is, will what you're about to buy help the world be a better place than before you began? And if you can't answer those 2 questions yes, you're selling the wrong thing. So at Poliwogg, we think, going back to Faster Cures, that passion capital can make a difference. People do care about curing Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or melanoma or any number of things. They care about health technology that helps take care of grandmother. They care about devices that help people lead a better life who have diabetes or heart problems. But what you've never had the chance to do before is to invest your passion capital in a young company. There's something called the Valley of Death. Now, how many of you would love to invest in the Valley of Death? Raise your hand. This is a lousy branding strategy. The Valley of Death is the place where all health companies go. They've gotten some philanthropy money, maybe some government money, and they're too small for VC money or pharma money. So what do? They die for lack of money, whether their idea was good or not. We at Poliwogg think that the Jobs Act and the millennial generation is a chance to finance what we call the bridge of life. Let's get companies through the valley, because these are companies that are trying to save you. These are companies that are trying to help your mother and your grandmother. We don't want them dying for lack of money. If their idea doesn't work, that's actually beneficial to everybody else. So I go back to what I said early on in the beginning. We can all change the world. The world is a bigger place than even Pfizer. But the point is, we don't have to change it alone. We can change it as a crowd. And here's one now. Thank you very much.